Hello, welcome. This is a talk about Qt Design Studio. The subtitle is Bridging the Gap. We are talking about the collaboration between designers and developers here. So I'm here together with Brook today, that's the lead designer for Qt Design Studio, and myself, Thomas Hartmann. And before I start, may I ask who's already familiar with Qt Design Studio here? Okay, a few people, good, great. Who's familiar with Qt Quick? Okay, that's the majority, I guess. And yeah, okay. So first I will start with giving a brief overview. I will talk a bit why we do Qt Design Studio, what is Qt Design Studio, and also what we did this year and what we are currently doing. Then Brook will give a demo of the actual workflow of the Qt Design Studio, how it is today. The main topic there will be exporting from Sketch and then make a UI out of that. Then I will make a demo of the upcoming features. I will concentrate on 3D, but not just 3D, I will also show some 2D features. And then we will show the roadmap, like what we want to do next. And I will sum up this a bit, and then there's time for discussions. Yes, so what is our vision for Design Studio? What we believe is that user experience is one of the most important points when you deliver product or even for a company. So I'm not a business guy, but I think user experience these days is really absolutely key for success if you want to deliver, for example, a consumer product. And even out of the consumer space, it's becoming more and more important. And if you want to deliver like really high user experiences, world-class user experiences, then of course the design and development department have to work closely together. And what we see is that this is in practice still a big issue when we do consulting or even inside our own company. It's not like this is solved. And what we believe is that we can help there a lot by delivering a common language, which we think could be QML, and common tools, which in this case is Qt Design Studio. That makes the collaboration process as easy, as barrier-free as possible. You can rapid prototype, you can iterate fast, all these buzzwords. So more concretely, what is in practice still the general workflow when we work together with customers is that you have a design department that thinks and works with wireframes, flow diagrams, with tools like Sketch, Figma, Photoshop. They create mock-ups, prototype, click dummies, concepts, huge specifications. And then this is handed over to developers, and they turn that into code. And then it's the developers who have to deal with the framework limitations, with the hardware limitations. And yeah, the designers usually are pretty agnostic from that. They are protected from that, but that's also where we see a lot of problems. Because you create designs that might not fly on the final hardware, and it takes a long time to find that out. Also, the developers have to deal with all the nitty-gritty details, which sometimes create also a lot of frictions in the process. So what we think is that we can help out there with Design Studio. So we have Design Studio here in the middle, and yeah, we have different roles working on that. Also on the design side, we have, of course, different types of designer. Here we call them sensorial designers. That's usually the visual designers, motion designers in some projects. Audio assets, that's just some future thinking. It's nothing is implemented in that direction, but this is also in some projects already happening. And then you have the interaction designers who more care about flows, navigation, interaction design. And then on the other side, you have the developers, and also there you have different types. The most important type here would be the front-end developer, who basically develops the front end. But of course, there's also back-end logic, data connections, back-end developers. We don't expect the back-end developers to work with Qt Design Studio. We just basically expect front-end developers here. But of course, the front-end developers talk to back-end developers. Yeah, and because everybody is using Qt Design Studio, which again sits on top of a real framework, in this case Qt and Qt Quick, we can basically deploy to real hardware, right? So the moment you have some hardware that is close to the real hardware with a final touch screen and the specs kind of match and so on, and you have a boot to Qt image or something similar, you can deploy to that hardware, and even if it's not the final hardware, at least close to it. And you can directly export, let's say, from Photoshop put it into the design studio. And even before you put any interactions on top, you at least test whether it looks properly with a final API and so on. And then you can try animations, you see whether the performance is okay, and so on and so on. Yeah, and this way, you basically collaborate. And this way, we think that you can really create really great stuff, like world-class UX. And yeah, these are a couple of smaller points. You can do prototyping with QML. So we also have a seamless path from a prototype to a final development. So that means, yes, you can throw away things if you think that's required for your development process, but you don't necessarily have to, especially the assets you can keep. So maybe some car parts you can keep. And you basically do all the validation already with the same technology that you do for the final implementation, and that saves a lot of time. And then QML is very, very strong on reusing components, right? You have QML components, and that's a very strong concept. So once you have a huge set of components, you can use those components in prototypes and productions. Yeah, that's one way to ensure brand consistency, these custom styles, of course. And then pixel-perfect animations, easy-to-use tools. That's kind of a hint for the timeline we implemented, where you can do the animations inside Qt Design Studio, and you don't do them in After Effects, for example, like what we saw a lot before, that animations are done in After Effects and then have to be implemented by developer. Now you can basically give Qt Design Studio to the motion designer, and he can do that directly in QML. Yeah, and we were very busy. So we started actually in 2016, but in 2018, December, we had the first release. That is the first release of Qt Quick Design Studio, and that is based on Qt Quick and Qt Creator, and has actually quite a long history as Qt Quick Designer. But what we did for this release is that we try to remove all the hurdles for designers. So we removed the C++ parts from Qt Creator, so we don't see it. It's easy to install. You don't have to set up kits. You don't have to know what Qt is. You don't have to compile anything. You can even deploy the final hardware without a compiler. We have a Photoshop exporter. We had the timeline. We had lots of special components developed for designers, which make it easy to create designs, and so on. And this was the initial release last year, and then we continued from that. The next release followed pretty fast. We had Linux packages, minor thing, lots of bug fixes, of course. We implemented merging when you import from Photoshop, that you basically can merge your current QML that you modified with an iterative import from Photoshop. In June, that's really important, we added the Sketch Bridge, so now we can also import from Scratch, and we have a Community Edition available. The Community Edition doesn't have the Scratch and Photoshop import, but it has all the rest of the functionality, and yeah, it's something you can give to students, and that helps us to create a community. In September, we had the 1.3 release that comes with a curve editor, an advanced curve editor that is close to what you see in tools like Maya. It's already hinting a bit into the 3D space, but actually during this event, I talked to a couple of people who really liked that approach, even for the 2D animations, and thought it's a missing feature, kind of. And then we improved a lot the property editor, and of course we did a lot of other stuff, but I highlighted the property editor here because we did a lot of work there, and we did eat a lot of our own dog food. So it's now using Qt Quick Controls 2. Before it was still using Qt Quick Controls 1. And we've really spent a lot of time there. And I think this is also improving the usability a lot, because the property editor in the end is a very important part of such a tool. And now what we work on for the next release in December, the 1.4 release, is Qt Quick 3D support. Maybe saw that already in the keynote. So we want to integrate 3D content. I will demonstrate that later. And also smaller things, like, for example, align the distribution tools. I will also show that. And you can already download this as snapshots from the online installer and try it out. So yeah, I think this is working basically since this week or so. Yeah, and then it's time for the demo, and Brook will start. Thank you so far. Right.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Let me just connect my computer here. See how directional that is. So are there any designers here today? Hey, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. Wow, it's more than last year. I guess I need to set up screen monitoring. Why is it on that screen? All right. And is anybody using Sketch for their design work? 1, 2, 3. Okay, a few hands. Good. Okay. There you go. That's a bit odd. All right, never mind. So, this is Sketch here. We're going to start here. This is a design tool, vector-based, quite popular for UI work. It's quite good for sort of screen design and flow layouts and all that kind of stuff. Seems to be that a lot of designers have moved towards this type of tool for doing UI, sort of away from Photoshop and Illustrator. And so that's why we've kind of created a plugin for it. This is the plugin here. This is the CubeBridge plugin itself. And to start with, how I tend to work is I've just got a page with all of my rough artwork on it. And this is all just sort of sketches and ideas and stuff that might become part of my UI assets. And you can see here on the left that nothing's really organized, nothing's really labeled. It's really just a place for me to actually kind of do my design, do my creative work, and then decide what actually is going to be in the UI itself. And to start with the plugin, we can have a little look at some of the very basic features. I won't go too much into the actually more advanced stuff today. I'd rather keep it sort of basic for designers. One of the most important things is this QML ID. That's really important later down the line in Design Studio, and you need these to be formatted a certain way. They follow a sort of rule set for how they can and can't be named. Luckily, the plugin itself is actually capable of generating unique and correct QML IDs for everything in your file. So if you're a designer who has no idea about any of this stuff, you don't actually have to worry about this. You can just let the plugin do it. However, if you're a little bit more advanced and you already know that you have a certain name scheme that you have to follow, then you can just also rename these manually. And then the next most important part is this export as option. Now, this is how you configure everything in your Sketch project, how it should actually be in Design Studio, whether it should be a component, whether it should be a child, whether it should be merged artwork, or whether it should be skipped. Because I've got an artboard selected at the moment, my only options are component or skip. And later on, when we have a look at one of these sort of components themselves, we can take a look at the other options. One new feature that we added in this version is the ability to multi-select. So in Photoshop, before, you would have to actually click every artboard, set skip, or set component for each piece of your file, each piece of your design. Now you can actually just multi-select, and in this case, choose to set them all to components or choose to set them all to skipped. And because I don't want these in my QML project, I'm just going to actually skip all of these artboards from the export process. One of the really nice things about Sketch that maps very well onto Design Studio Concept is the ability to create symbols. So with Sketch, once you have a piece of work that you actually like, you know, in this case, it's a text layer and a couple of different shapes, you can actually just create a symbol from that. And what it'll do is it will package that artwork up and put it into a separate place where you then have that as a symbol. And what that means is when you then come to design your screens later on, you can just go to this symbols palette, select one of these symbols, drop it into your screen. The really good thing about that is, by default, the Sketch plugin is actually going to automatically create a UI QML component from that symbol. So each time you use a symbol in your design, it's just going to reuse that component. It's not going to create duplicate copies of your artwork or duplicate assets or anything like that. And so you can see here with these symbols, this is where I actually start to organize the work a bit. So here I kind of label everything correctly. In some cases I have different assets for the on and the off state that later on I'll use states in Design Studio to control that. And I've labeled everything correctly, and I've also set the export options for each of these things. So if I want it to be a child, so if I want it to be an item inside that component, I set it to a child. If I just want artwork that's maybe lines and shapes that I just want merged down, everything that I want merged into one asset, I set to merged. Text is automatically a child by default because we actually want a dynamic text object. We don't want to merge that text down into an image. And yeah, so here I can actually configure and organize and label and set up how all of this should be exported. And then when it comes to actually designing my screens, I can just pull these symbols onto my screen pages, create layouts, export those, and it'll be an instance of my component rather than a separate asset. One of the other really nice features we have with Sketch is the ability to use property overrides. So in Sketch, even though that symbol has this text area, this text label that we've created, we can override all of these text labels with our own content for this specific one. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate an alias property in Design Studio automatically, so we can set the text differently for each instance of that component, which is a really nice feature when you have, buttons or dials that you want the same component, but they all have different labels on them. And just to show you how the symbols work, if you come here to the Insert menu, you can go to the symbols in the document. You can just pull a symbol out. Oh, I don't want that one, actually. And drop it into your artwork like that. Create copies of it. Create your symbol overrides. And when you're ready, you can then export that into Design Studio. Now, just to quickly mention what the other features here are in the Sketch Bridge, the QML type actually allows you to override a specific item with a known QML component in your design. So you could, in fact, provided you put the import library in, which is what the next field underneath it for is, you could, in fact, swap this switch for a quick control switch, or this slider for a quick control slider. And then finally, the properties underneath allow you to add QML properties to that item as well. So if you had a slider and you wanted the range to be a certain range, you could set the to and from values here too. And then you would have a slider with your custom range. This goes into the more advanced uses of the Bridge plugin, which is not something I really want to show today because I'd really like to keep this kind of fairly simple and for designers. And then underneath, you can create aliases for your item. You can set it as a clip, so the outside will clip the contents, and you can flag whether it's going to be visible or not in the UI file itself. But for now, we don't worry about that. We'll just export it. One thing that actually came in with the Sketch plugin is that we're now actually able to export SVG. So Photoshop was only PNG. But now we can actually do SVGs from Sketch, which is fantastic for all these kind of rescalable dynamic designs. Okay, I already set the path here. This is where you would actually kind of choose an export folder. I have one set up. So we can just come down and export that. And this is going to create a metadata file of the entire kind of all of your components, all your artboards, all your symbols. We can go straight to that folder and see that it's exported all of my assets here as SVG files, along with a metadata file that the Design Studio then converts into QML. So if we come into Design Studio, we can create a new project. Just a default blank empty project. And then up at the top here, we have this Resources tab, which allows us to add a new resource. Make sure we've got the right folder. We select our metadata file, which brings us into the asset importer. When we click import, it's going to pass that metadata file. It's going to bring in all of our assets. It'll rename every asset to make sure that it all is, individually renamed, and it will take care of generating these QML files from all of our artwork. And if there's any problems with your file, it's going to give you a warning here. And in some cases, it might say, are you sure you want to import that? Or maybe you should go back to Sketch and double check this. Okay. And now we see down here in the project panel, it's actually generated UI QML files for every component in that sketch design. So we see here, we have exactly pixel perfect, all of our items, all componentized already. And in the case of where we use the symbol override, we already have an alias property here, right? So we can change that text from the outside of that component. We don't need to go inside that component. And this is the basis for how, as a designer, you can bring your artwork into Design Studio from a tool that you're familiar with. So you can continue to do your design work in Sketch or in Photoshop, or in the future, maybe some other design tools. And still be able to, without really any knowledge of QML, without any programming knowledge, be able to bring your design work into Design Studio and either continue to work on that yourself, if you are that way inclined. If you have a sort of motion graphics background, you can do animations. If you're a front-end dev, you can start to program interaction with all of the tools that we have here. So you can use the states to create different states of your application, and you can use the timeline to create animations, or the curve editor to create really advanced sort of motion graphics animations. And then at that point in which you're ready, you can hand this over to a developer who can reuse these components. They no longer need to start again from scratch. They don't need to say, okay, well, that looks nice and everything, and now let me re-implement that from the ground up again. And I think that's, as Thomas said, that's actually a really important thing to remember, that regardless of the work that you do as a developer, there's always going to be more work that the engineer needs to do. And you may not be aware of how much that is or how complex that is. It may be that the target hardware requires that you refactor this code, or the actual complexity of the application that you're designing goes beyond what you can do as a designer, and you need to actually work with the developers, with the engineers, to provide them the best set of assets that you can in order that they can do their job and you can do your job. The way I often think about it as a designer is that we are creating maps for the developers to follow. But the map is not the terrain. And so regardless of how much detail or resolution you can put into your maps, it's never going to be the real final finished product ready for that embedded board, but you can get a lot closer than you could before. And it's a bit like, I don't know if anyone's read Borges. He wrote a short story called On Exactitude in Science. And it's about a civilization of map makers who become so obsessed with the maps that they make that they create one-to-one maps of the land that they live in that end up lying across the surface of their terrain. And the idea is that you can't make a one-to-one map of a super complex application just with the design tools alone. You need to do development on top of that as well. But of course, you want to be as close to the developers as you can, and you want to be able to work back and forth between each other. And I think that's about it. That's all I really wanted to show today, is just that really very much designer-friendly approach to how you can bring your work from Sketch into Design Studio. And from that point on, there's an awful lot more you can do, but you should check out some of our webinars or come and have a look at our demo booth, and we can show you the more advanced features of Design Studio. And I think I'm going to pass back over to Thomas so that he can actually show you Design Studio in a bit more detail. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, now I'm back. So yeah, since one of the main topics for the next release is 3D, I start with another open source application that some of you might know, that's Blender. And I have this nice car in here. And actually, we exported that as an OBJ, and we will import that now in Design Studio. So the idea is that the 3D artists, the technical artists, work with their favorite 3D tool. Doesn't have to be Blender, could be 3D Studio Max or Maya, and they basically set up the assets as far as they can in those tools, similar to Sketch or Photoshop in the 2D case, and then you export it to some format. In this case, it would OBJ, but you support actually quite big variants of formats. And then you can import that to do Design Studio. So this is a simple 2D UI that actually Brook prepared. We use that for the red demo that you can also showcase at the demo booth. I will just run it so you have an idea what that is. It's a simple cluster basically, and I removed all the center parts, and it's a bit too big, so let's zoom that to 50%. Yeah. And now the idea is to have the car in the middle that I just showed you. So I close that again. So what I do is similar to the 2D import, I go to the resource tab and I click add new resources. And then I go to the correct folder. And here I have my OBJ file. And in the 3D case, the options are a bit different. So I now could choose to optimize the mesh, and there are quite a lot of options, and we are already still working on those. But let's just keep the defaults for now, and then we click import. We wait a bit. It's now converting the scene graph into QML, where the actual mesh data is turned into a format we call .mesh, which is just the preferred format for our runtime. It's already done, so we can close it. So in our project now we have this subfolder here with a Genesis QML file. I double click on that. And as you can already see, there's nothing in the 2D view now because that's a pure 3D scene, but we added this new 3D editor. The scene doesn't have a light, that's why the car is totally black for now. Let's have a short look at the QML because that's also interesting. So here we have the QML. It's pretty much normal QML. So we have a node at the root, then we have a couple of model blocks with materials. Yeah, you can also look at that in the navigator here. Yeah, nothing special, and that is basically the car, while we still have some access to the submodels like doors and so on. Yeah, I can turn on this light. Now we have a basic default light in our 3D view, and you see the car is a bit upside down. Okay, that's not so good. So we can go to the root node here, and we can actually rotate it. So we can rotate it here, and I want to rotate it by minus 90 degrees. And actually what you see here is that we improved the property editor a lot, and we looked at 3D tools for a couple of features. So for example, now we have this dragging implemented, which is really useful for working in 3D. This was not there before, and this already in the released version. So now I have rotated my car, and I think that's... No, actually I want to do one more thing. The car is red, right? So we go to the body material here, and we can change it to another color, let's say green. Whoops, the green is a bit, the light is a bit too strong here. But that's something we are still working on. So the default light is just too strong. But when you will see that later, how it works. And another thing we can do is, because this is QML, we have all the power of QML available. That means I can export this as an alias property, so the color will be available when I use this component later on. So let's do that. Actually, you see also a couple of other small things we did in the property editor. For example, the property editor now remembers all the recent colors. That's very useful when you do designs. Okay, now let's save this file. And then we go back to our original file. That was car view screen. And we go into the form edit mode, and you see that here. So now first, we add a quick 3D scene. For that, we click on this flow tag here that will add the required import. After we have the import, we have all the items available in the item library. They don't have icons yet, but that's why it's still a beta. I drag in the view, and now I have a view here with this cube. That's just the default. Just position this here in the middle, scale it up a bit. So, okay. So, and then in the navigator, we can have, navigator, we can look at the scene. Scene consists of a directional light. I don't want that. Of a cube with a model, with a material. I don't want that. And I want a light point instead, point light instead. I will drag that in. The camera we keep. And now we need to import also the model. The importer created also an import and a flow tag for that. This was called Genesis 3 G7T. So let's click here. And now we have the item for our car, and we can again drag that here. Oops, and now you see the car here. That's already quite nice, but we want to do more. So now we go to the 3D view of that. We can click here, and now we have in parallel the 3D view of that. We can zoom out a bit here. We can select, for example, the light here, move it up. Okay, that's good, but the light is way too bright. So let's change that a bit. I think we can really tone it down to 5. We can also make it fade a bit, whatever. Okay, now it looks already a lot better. We can move the light a bit. So now we move it a bit around to the front. And we can also navigate inside here. Here you see, for example, the camera. So now let's put the two views in parallel, and then we can move the camera up. You see how basically this view is using the camera while the car moves. Okay, that's good. And then we can also move the Z value a bit. And then we can bring the car closer. And then we have to move the camera again a bit in the 3D view. The other direction. Okay, and now we have like nice view of our car like we intended. And I kind of like that. Another thing, we can select the model, and since I exposed the color, we can still change the color from here. So we can make it orange, if you want that. Now it's orange. For now we don't need the 3D view anymore, because now we are compositing again. Yeah, now we have the nice orange car in the middle. Okay. And we can, for example, animate this with our standard animation tools. So let's add a timeline. For demo purposes, I say I want a continuous animation that ping-pongs. Fine. So I select the car. And let's get rid of this. I add a keyframe on the rotation. Insert keyframe. And maybe we also want to animate the color. Let's say also insert keyframe. We can expand this so we see our keyframes. Now we go to the end. We turn on the record button. And now we rotate it by 360 degrees. Okay, and we change the color again. Okay, fine. Then we turn off the record button because we don't want to make accidental keyframes. And now you see we already have an animated car that's rotating in the middle. Pretty simple, right? And you see it's behind the 2D assets, so we can use the navigator to bring it in front. Oops, first you have to eat. So now it's in front. It should be. Oh, why it's not in front? Ah, yeah, of course. The view is clipping. Okay, let's make the view a bit bigger. Good point. Yeah. Okay, now this is what I wanted. It's still not beautiful, but for demonstration purposes, I think it shows what you can do. And now we can also center this a bit better. See, no, really good. Okay, and now we can run that in the live preview. Whoa, yep. Yeah, and you can see it continuously runs. And one feature we also added was the more advanced animation editor. Let me just showcase that a bit. So we can open that, and here we see the rotation animation with 2 keyframes. We can, for example, insert a new keyframe in the middle. Okay. And what makes this thing interesting now, we can say we want tangents. And now we add tangents. And now this thing becomes more powerful because now I basically have a holistic view on the complete curve. So I can really tweak the curves. For some reason, the live preview disappeared. Let's restart that. Okay. And now I have my animation. And now if I'm an motion designer, I can really tweak this, like whatever I want. I can make it more linear. I can slow it down in the middle, and so on. Okay. Yes. I think this is what we will have in the next release for the 3D stuff. And I think, yeah, it's already quite useful. You can do already quite impressive stuff. We will improve the 3D view a bit more, so we can do more, like you saw that you still have just a single camera and so on. This still needs a lot of improvement, but I think it's a good start. And if you want to try that out, you can already download the snapshots from the online installer. Yeah, but also let's have a short look at what we added for 2D. So open another file where I prepared a few things. So what we did already add, I can show you, oops, is that finally, and this was already part in QDS 1.3, is that finally multi-selection works nicely in the property editor. This was not really supported. So we can now do things like select all these text items down here that I prepared, all of them at once. We go here, and now, since they're all text items, we still have a property editor available, and we can say, hey, I want all of them to be size of 24, and all of them should be Arial or Courier, whatever. This was missing. Before, you would have to do that for every text item, one by one, which was very annoying, of course. And then another feature that will be in the next release that we added is alignment and distribution tools. So we already have layouts, and somebody could ask, why do you need those at all? So the idea is that we implemented alignment and distribution tools like you know them from Illustrator. But I think they are useful, even if you have layouts, because they're quite easy to use, so I will show that. And people are already familiar with that. And especially in the embedded space, you have a lot of static layouts where you don't necessarily need anchors or layouts. And then this is just basically a natural approach to do your layouts. And also it's really nice if you're still in the prototyping space and you just want to try out things. So for example, we can say just align all of these items on the center line, okay, with the text. You don't see much here because we're already aligned, and now we distribute them evenly. It will warn us that there will be some rounding issues, and then it will distribute them nicely. And we can do the same with the nice rectangles here. So we select all of them, and then we, for example, say align to the top, align all of them to the center, align all of them to the bottom. And we can also distribute them again. Now the spacing is evenly distributed. And we can also do this here. Yep. And by default, it will always use the selection to distribute, but you can also select another item to distribute against. That's really your choice. So this is really close to what people are already used from Illustrator. So designers should really understand this kind of tools, and it makes your life a lot easier, I think. So you really can play around with this kind of how to distribute items in your design. Yeah. And that's more or less what we did. I mean, you can also talk a bit more about the property editor that really got lots of small updates. So now we have, for some properties, integrated sliders where it makes sense. We have this dragging feature. And actually, one more thing I want to show you is the updated binding editor. So let's call this rectangle green. And a very powerful concept of QML is property bindings. So we can set a binding on this one. This was already possible before, but in the last version, we improved the text editor here a lot. So the text editor here now has the same auto-completion and exactly the same behavior as the normal property editor, the normal text editor that you can also go in when you click this tab here. But what we now add is also drop-down menu. Because we noticed that designers are not really that familiar with writing text, and they make small typos, and it takes a lot of time to find them and so on. And this really helps you because, there's no way to make typos anymore, right? We just select rectangle 3 or green, and then we say height. And as long as it's not an exception, it's basically an expression, it's just a direct property binding, which covers 80% of the cases. There's no typing, so less errors, everybody is happy. And I think this is a really useful feature. And now you see, here's the binding. We can do the same for the color, for example. So set binding, undefined, again, green, and then you see it already knows that there are only 2 color properties. So it only shows me the color properties. I click OK, and it works. That's really nice and useful for property bindings, which is, in the end, like roughly 60% of the work once you start to add interactions. That's it for the demonstration. So I will now go back to a few slides. So I want to talk a bit about our roadmap. What's green is basically done. That's in Qt Design Studio 1.3. So we improved the property editor. We created the new easing curve editor I briefly showed to you. What we currently work on is that. That is basically already in the snapshot and will be released in December. And I showed it to you. And there's also like an outlook, like what we plan for the future, like what we research. First, one thing you want to be able that you can annotate designs, that you basically can write text next to your designs, and they are not part of the QML, but they are part of the file. And you can basically explain your designs. You can annotate them in many ways. This is something that a lot of customers ask. So you can add a bit of explanations, like pretty much like code comments to your designs. And that's something we will do. A really big topic that still needs some research, but we are heavily working on, is a flow editor. Like designers should be able to define some kind of application flow, how you get from screens and to other screens, from states to other states, and you should do that in a purely graphical manner. We already did a lot of work there. Then the workspace is kind of an important topic. So people want to be able to manage their workspace more flexible than what you currently can do. So yeah, we are basically thinking about doc widgets and want to have a really nice doc widgets framework in Qt Design Studio. Then we need some more style management of all kinds. That's also big topics like variant management and styles. That's still a lot of research. And then what we noticed is that the item library that I also used in this demo, it's too limited for really big projects, and it's too limited also with the 3D assets and all this. So we are already doing basically a full redesign of the item library where you manage your components. So there, you should basically be able to import other libraries. You need previews of your custom components. It has to be more scalable. It has to be easier to find things. It should be able to export things from your project to a library and so on and so on. So that's a really important and big topic. Yeah, and that's just to summarize the benefits of using Qt Design Studio. You have visual editing for the UI designs, for the animations and so on. That makes you faster, allows faster iterations. You can collaborate easier with designers and developers. You have reusable components. You can combine 2D and 3D. You can prototype as you design. That's all very valuable features. The next thing is, yes, you have improved predictability because you are faster and you're faster on the target hardware, and you're always using the framework, the final development framework. That means there are a lot less surprises, right? If the performance that isn't good or a feature is missing, you immediately notice that, right? Once you have something on the target hardware, you kind of know that the framework can do it. And yeah, you can use the same code everywhere. There's one more thing I want to show you after that. So we can even preview our designs on the web. But of course, also on MCUs, this is now a big topic. So next year, we will also start to support MCUs with Qt Quick, like with the designer and the tooling. The framework is already there. Yeah, and all of this helps you to improve your quality, avoid surprises, keep schedules, and so on and so on. And I think we really believe in this product, and I think it really helps. But before we go to the Q&A session, let me show you one more thing. So we have now this design viewer. Oh, why don't you see it? Oh, because the slides are still running. So we have this design viewer, which is basically just a URL you can enter. And then it's just a WebAssembly-based application that you can also host yourself if you don't trust this URL. It comes with a couple of demos, but you can also upload your own project. So in Design Studio, you can package your project in build, generate resource file. It's still a bit hidden. 3D won't work. That's why I can't show this example, because this is using WebGL, and our 3D runtime is not completely working on WebGL at this point in time. But you can upload your project here, and then it will run. And I can show you a few of the examples we have already here, or I think it's enough to just show one. So this is just an example. Yeah, it takes a while to compile that. But once it's there, I think the performance is really good. And yeah, that's an easy way to share designs in an organization, right? You can easily share it this way. You don't even have to send files around necessarily. You can fork that. It's open source. You can create your own version that basically shows your current projects, and everybody can just go to your internal URL in the intranet and yeah, just preview your latest designs. Okay. And with that, it's thank you a lot for listening, and then it's time for discussions and questions.
Yes, so thank you, Thomas and Brook. That was a really nice talk. So now we have a couple of minutes for questions. So I'm going to pass out this microphone, so please wait for it.
In your example, you created an alias for the car color. If your designer ships an updated car and you re-import that, do you lose all your work that you put into the QML for the aliases? So you have to reconnect it all again?
That's a good question. On the 2D side, we already have merging. On the 3D side, we don't have that yet, but it's something we definitely want to have. So what we do on the 2D side is that for every QML file, we know, because we basically write that in annotations, which code was generated by the user and which code was generated by the importer. And then we can merge it. And we kind of know that property aliases, I mean, they can come from the tool also, but then we just preserve them, right? That's how we do it in 2D, and I think that's also something we want to do in 3D in the future.
So I have a couple of questions, I believe. The first one would be, what if the application has like vertical and horizontal version when you pivot the phone, for example? How can we use the work from designer and how we can use it from the Qt point of view?
Yeah, I mean, okay. Qt has a quite powerful layout system and also anchors. Of course, it's a challenge for this workflow because when you do static designs in Sketch and so on, then yeah, you get problems. But yeah, that just means you have to do more work in Design Studio, right? You basically have to import one form factor, for example, from Sketch, and then you use our layout system, our anchors to basically
Because from Sketch you get only X and Y coordinates,
yeah,
and you have to apply alignments and layouts in the Design Studio.
Yeah, that's how it's currently working, because also our layout system is not what Sketch has or what some Sketch plugins has. It's more powerful. At this point in time, we don't support any layouts from Sketch, so you have to do the layouts in Design Studio.
And thanks. And if you have this timeline and you, for example, have these gauges that you animate, how can we then code it? Because this timeline is only to preview how it can operate, or is it something that we can use?
I mean, I think I can answer that one. So you create the animation on the timeline, you create the entire range of your gauge, and then you can actually expose that current frame property as an alias and create a data binding between that current frame property and a value from your backend. So for all the examples here, if you come and have a look at our Autodesk collaboration with VRED, you can see these gauges are actually being driven by a JavaScript mock backend. So as a designer / front-end developer, you can actually write a sort of JavaScript simulation that's somewhat close to what you would expect from your real backend. You can connect that data to Design Studio through a binding, and it will drive the timeline, drive the current frame of the timeline from the data itself.
Yeah, but actually, that's a very good question. And the name timeline sometimes is a bit misleading, and we call that parameterization. So you can use the timeline without animations, right? Usually for previewing, we always use animations, but you can also bind it to the actual speed in the end. And we call that parameterization. So you use the timeline to define basically a continuum between 0 and 1,000, how your UI looks, and then you bind that to a value from your backend. And then you don't have an animation, but basically the backend drives your gauge.
Data-driven animation.
Yeah.
But the designer has to know that there will be this property in the future from the backend, or can it be mocked somehow? Or
I mean, it's of course it's useful if you know your ranges in advance. So if a designer has a specification where they know that this specific gauge has a range between 0 and X, then they can already set up the timeline exactly for that range. But if you're prototyping before you have that specification, you may just create the animation first and then go back later and adapt the timeline and move the keyframes to the correct range once you have that information. So you can always go back and rework that animation again.
You don't have to do that necessarily, right? You can also just create a gauge component that just has a property, and then somebody else who basically creates the screens and has the overview how to connect that to the backend does a range mapping.
And I think that we will have more range mapping type of items in the future as well. It's something that we'd like to, actually have specific range mapping kind of items that can be changed later on as well, very easily to remap different ranges.
All right, so one last question.
So do you plan on doing import from other UI editors, like Multiplatform, like Figma or XD?
We're looking at XD at the moment. That one's very interesting to us because, of course, Sketch is Mac only.
Well, XD is Windows and Mac only, so no options for like Linux developers?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure what people would want from a Linux one. Is a GIMP. If a GIMP plugin is something that the community really wants, then maybe there's a way to look at that. But right now we're actually just looking at XD, and we're looking at generally people who have Windows and Mac for their design platforms.
Okay, so I think we need to wrap up now, since the next talk is I think
there's one more question in the front here, if that's all right.
Yeah, so I think you can just take that offline.
All right,
so,
we'll
so the guys will be around,
then,
so feel free to catch them.
Yeah. Thank you a lot.
Okay, thanks everybody.